Marcus Ford was a man of integrity, discipline, and dedication. As a seasoned police officer, he had seen the worst of human nature, but he always believed in maintaining a sense of order and trust in his own personal life. His career had been a steady climb, and he had earned the respect of his peers and the community. But it was in the seemingly safe confines of his family that his world would come crashing down in ways he could never have imagined. Marcus had always shared a close relationship with his younger brother, Devonte. They had grown up together, sharing the same room, the same toys, and the same dreams. Despite their differences, Devonte being the more charming and sociable of the two, while Marcus was focused, serious, and reserved, the brothers had always been there for each other. They had their occasional spats, as brothers do, but the bond they shared was unbreakable. Or so Marcus thought. It was at a party, of all places, that the first cracks in Marcus's perfect world began to show. The party was thrown by one of Devonte's friends, Ayana. Ayana and Devonte had been close for years, and Marcus had seen her at family gatherings and casual meetups. She was beautiful, confident, and always had a way of making people feel at ease. Marcus had always admired her from a distance, but he never gave much thought to the idea of pursuing a relationship with her. She had always seemed to have a special connection with Devonte, and Marcus assumed that was how things were meant to be. But that night, something changed. The connection that had always been reserved for Devonte suddenly felt different. In a conversation that started innocently enough, Marcus found himself talking to Ayana more than he had ever done before. They spoke about everything: life, work, their childhood memories, and even their dreams for the future. The more they spoke, the more Marcus realized how easy it was to talk to her. She was smart, funny, and engaging. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, something he hadn't felt in a long time. In that moment, the thought of a romantic relationship with Ayana didn't seem out of the question. What Marcus didn't know was that Ayana's feelings for Devonte were far from simple. She had always been drawn to his charm and charisma, and even though she had maintained a close friendship with Marcus, her heart still lingered with his younger brother. What Marcus didn't realize that night was that Ayana's attraction to him was complicated by her lingering feelings for Devonte. And although Ayana had been quietly harboring a desire to be with Marcus for years, she wasn't ready to completely let go of her past with Devonte. She was in a delicate balance, caught between two men she cared for in very different ways. The evening passed, and as the party started winding down, Ayana and Marcus exchanged numbers. Over the next few weeks, they continued talking, first casually, then more seriously. As they grew closer, Ayana found herself torn between the two brothers. But it was clear that she was beginning to see Marcus in a new light. He was everything Devonte wasn't: stable, reliable, and thoughtful. Ayana, who had always been used to the more unpredictable and carefree nature of Devonte, found comfort in Marcus's steadiness. She was drawn to his quiet strength. Eventually, the connection between Marcus and Ayana blossomed into something more than friendship. Their relationship developed slowly, and before long, they were inseparable. They shared intimate moments, dreams for the future, and an undeniable passion for each other. Marcus had fallen in love with her completely, never suspecting that Ayana's heart was still divided. He was certain that Ayana was everything he had ever wanted. She was beautiful, intelligent, and compassionate. She brought a sense of warmth into his life that he had never experienced before. But what Marcus didn't know, what Ayana had worked so hard to keep hidden, was the truth about her past with Devonte. Despite her growing feelings for Marcus, she had never been able to fully break free from her complicated relationship with his younger brother. Ayana's secret affair with Devonte had been ongoing for years, hidden from Marcus and everyone around them. It had started as a brief fling during a rough patch in her relationship with Marcus, but it had turned into something much more than that. As the months passed and Marcus and Ayana's relationship deepened, Devonte remained a shadow in their lives. While Marcus was away at work, or when they were spending time with family, Ayana would slip away to meet Devonte in secret. What was once a brief affair had turned into a full-blown, ongoing relationship. The brothers were oblivious to the betrayal unfolding right under their noses. Even though the affair was the one thing Ayana knew would ultimately destroy her relationship with Marcus if it ever came to light, she continued it for years. She justified it in her mind, convincing herself that she loved Marcus but couldn't shake the magnetic pull she felt toward Devonte. It was an emotional conflict that wore Ayana down, but she couldn't seem to end it. In the meantime, Marcus remained completely unaware. His love for Ayana was pure, and he believed in their future together. As their relationship grew, Marcus and Ayana married and had children, 3, in fact. Their life together appeared perfect on the surface. But as the years passed, Marcus would come to learn that appearances can be deceiving. Unbeknownst to him, the secret that Ayana had been hiding was poised to come crashing into his life in the most devastating way imaginable. The life Marcus had built with Ayana was one of stability, routine, and apparent happiness. They had their share of challenges, but like any couple, they navigated through them together. The birth of their children only seemed to deepen their bond. Marcus, proud of his family, never questioned the integrity of his relationship with Ayana. He had no reason to. She was his partner, the mother of his children, and the woman he trusted above all others. However, as with many relationships, cracks began to form beneath the surface, unnoticed at first but gradually widening until they could no longer be ignored. The first sign that something was wrong came during a routine visit to the doctor. Marcus and Ayana's youngest child, a 7-year-old boy named Daniel, had fallen ill with a fever that wouldn't subside. Marcus, concerned for his son, took him to the hospital. While waiting for the test results, a nurse casually remarked about Daniel's blood type in relation to Marcus's own. The nurse seemed surprised that Daniel had a different blood type from Marcus, who was type O. Daniel's blood type was AB, which was biologically impossible for a child of 2 type O parents. At first, Marcus dismissed the comment. It was an error, he thought, a mix-up at the lab. But as the days passed, his mind kept returning to the nurse's words. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that there had been inconsistencies before, small things, seemingly insignificant details that he had brushed off in the past. Ayana had always been a bit evasive about certain aspects of their children's health, but Marcus had chalked it up to her natural protectiveness as a mother. However, the blood type discrepancy gnawed at him. It wasn't just a random detail, it was a fact that didn't align with the reality he thought he knew. He needed answers, and more than that, he needed clarity. So, Marcus did what any methodical and analytical person would do, he requested a DNA test. At first, Ayana was resistant, dismissing his concerns as paranoia or misplaced worry. But Marcus was insistent. There was something about the situation that didn't sit right with him. She reluctantly agreed, perhaps thinking it was a one-off test, nothing more than a formality. She never imagined that Marcus's doubts would spiral into a full-blown revelation that would shatter everything they had built together. The results arrived a few weeks later, confirming Marcus's worst fears. The child in question, Daniel, was not his biological son. He and Ayana had shared the news of the pregnancy, the joys of parenthood, and all the milestones together, but Marcus was not his father. His world began to unravel as he looked at his son, knowing the truth. The test results were only the beginning. Marcus, in his shock and disbelief, insisted on testing his other 2 children. With each test, the evidence mounted against Ayana. It was undeniable. 3 of their 4 children were not his. The world he had so carefully crafted was a lie. And the worst part? The children he had raised, the children he loved with all his heart, had been fathered by someone else, his own brother. The realization hit Marcus like a freight train. He had been duped, deceived in a way that went beyond his worst nightmares. The betrayal was not only from Ayana, whom he had trusted implicitly, but from Devonte, the brother he had grown up with, the man he had shared everything with. The idea that Devonte had been involved in this deceit, that he had been complicit in tearing apart Marcus's family, was almost too much to bear. But the DNA tests didn't lie. The truth was now painfully clear. Marcus's first instinct was to confront Ayana. He didn't care about anything else at that moment. All that mattered was confronting the woman he had married, the mother of his children, and demanding an explanation. He found her at their home, sitting in the living room, her face drawn with exhaustion. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, and when it arrived, there was no defense, no excuse she could offer that would make this betrayal any less painful. The confrontation was raw, emotional, and explosive. Marcus's anger was palpable, but there was also a sense of profound sadness that came with the knowledge that everything he had believed in was false. Ayana's eyes were filled with shame, but she didn't attempt to deny the truth. She had kept this secret for so long that her guilt was written all over her face. "I never wanted you to find out this way," Ayana whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to hurt you, Marcus. I never wanted this. I thought I could manage it, that I could keep it all hidden, but I can't keep lying anymore." Marcus's heart sank. His mind was racing, his thoughts a blur of confusion, hurt, and disbelief. How could this have happened? How could the woman he loved, the mother of his children, betray him so completely? And how could Devonte, his own flesh and blood, be a part of this twisted deception? "Why, Ayana? Why would you do this to me?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you lie to me for so long, and why would you do this to our children?" Ayana hung her head, unable to look him in the eye. She had known this day would come, the day when the truth would come crashing down on them, but she hadn't prepared herself for the devastation it would cause. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said softly. "But I was lost, Marcus. I loved you, I still love you, but I couldn't let go of Devonte. He's always been a part of me, and I didn't know how to end it. I thought I could love you both, but I couldn't. I'm so sorry." The words were almost too much for Marcus to process. It wasn't just the affair, it was the years of lies. The betrayal had cut him so deeply that even now, as Ayana confessed, he could not bring himself to forgive her. His anger boiled over, and for a moment, he felt as though the weight of the world was crushing him. But the story didn't end there. As Ayana spoke, she revealed even more. The affair had continued for years, even after their marriage, even after Marcus and Devonte's bond had seemed unbreakable. It was a truth so ugly that Marcus couldn't comprehend it. His world was crumbling before his eyes, and with it, everything he had ever believed in. There was one final, devastating admission. "Devonte, he's the father of all three of our children," Ayana said, her voice barely audible. The truth was complete. The man Marcus had trusted most in the world had betrayed him in the most unforgivable way. The weight of the truth was too much for Marcus to bear. The world he had spent his life building, the family he had nurtured with love and devotion, was all an elaborate lie. 3 children, children he had cared for as his own, were not his. And the man he had always trusted, his younger brother Devonte, had played a role in that deception, fathering the children with Ayana during the course of their marriage. The devastation was not just in the betrayal of love, but in the complete collapse of the foundation of his life. Marcus couldn't think straight. His mind was a blur of rage, disbelief, and a deep, gnawing sadness. The anger was the most immediate emotion, burning through him like wildfire. He wanted answers, but in truth, no answer could ever be enough to justify what had happened. His heart pounded in his chest as he paced through the house, thoughts swirling like a violent storm. The faces of his children haunted him, their innocent eyes oblivious to the truth. The thought that they were his biological nephews, not his sons, was too painful to contemplate. The whole idea felt like an unbearable betrayal of everything he had stood for in life. Ayana, meanwhile, sat in silence, her eyes cast downward. She had confessed everything, and in the silence that followed, there was nothing more she could say to undo the harm she had caused. She understood Marcus's anger, but even she was not prepared for the depth of his fury. She had kept this secret for so long, and in the end, it had destroyed everything. She had never wanted to hurt him, but the damage was irreversible. She had loved Marcus, but she had never been able to let go of Devonte. And now, they were both lost to her. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt as though the very air had been sucked out of the room, leaving him gasping for breath. His emotions were a tidal wave, pulling him under with every new revelation. His heart ached, but there was something more, something darker, that rose within him. A sense of betrayal from his own flesh and blood, a sense of betrayal from the one person he had trusted most in the world. Devonte was not just a brother, he was his confidant, his partner in life. To have him involved in such a treacherous act felt like a gut punch. Marcus had given his brother the benefit of the doubt, had trusted him with the most important aspects of his life. To think that Devonte had been the one to destroy it all, that was too much to process. In his haze of anger, Marcus began to fantasize about confronting Devonte, about confronting him with the truth. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted something else. Justice. Revenge. At that moment, the idea of confronting his brother felt like the only thing that could ease the rage building inside him. He needed to look Devonte in the eye, to make him understand the depth of the pain he had caused, to demand an explanation that would never come. "I need to see him," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. Ayana looked up, startled by the sudden shift in his tone. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Marcus muttered, the darkness in his voice unmistakable. He turned away from her, pacing again, his fists clenched. "But I have to see him. I have to make him face what he's done." Before Ayana could stop him, Marcus grabbed his car keys and stormed out of the house, leaving her behind. She sat motionless, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was coming. She knew how deep the betrayal ran, but she couldn't have predicted the depth of Marcus's rage. Devonte's house was not far, and Marcus's car sped down the road in a blur. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, some rational, others completely chaotic. His grip on the steering wheel was tight, knuckles white, as he imagined all the things he would say to his brother. But as the minutes passed, the anger inside him only grew, until it felt like a fire that could not be extinguished. When he arrived at Devonte's house, the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the neighborhood. The peacefulness of the evening felt completely at odds with the storm raging inside Marcus. He walked up the driveway without thinking, fists clenched, heart pounding. He rang the doorbell, the sound echoing in the quiet night. Moments later, the door opened, and there stood Devonte, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion. "Marcus?" Devonte asked, clearly not expecting a visit. Marcus didn't answer. He stepped forward, shoving his brother aside and into the hallway. Devonte stumbled back, taken aback by his brother's aggression. "What the hell is this, Marcus?" Devonte asked, his voice steady despite the tension. "What's going on?" "You know damn well what this is," Marcus growled. His anger was boiling over, and his fists were trembling with the urge to strike. You think you can just ruin my life, ruin everything I've ever believed in, and just walk away from it? Devonte's eyes widened with confusion. What are you talking about? I don't know what. Don't lie to me, Devonte. Marcus's voice cracked as he shouted. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you can steal my life and not face any consequences? I trusted you. I trusted you with everything, my family, my children, my wife. And you betrayed me. You ruined everything. Devonte seemed stunned by his brother's rage, but there was also something else in his eyes, guilt. The kind of guilt that Marcus couldn't ignore, no matter how hard he tried. But Marcus's anger had completely overtaken him. The next few moments felt like a blur. With one swift motion, Marcus reached out and grabbed Devonte by the collar. How could you do this to me? He hissed through clenched teeth. How could you do this to your own brother? Devonte struggled in his grip, his face now a mix of fear and regret. Marcus, please, calm down. Let's talk about this. Just calm down. But Marcus wasn't listening. The rage in his chest was consuming him, and in a moment of uncontrollable fury, he pushed Devonte back, knocking him off balance. The force of the shove sent Devonte crashing into the nearby wall, but that wasn't enough for Marcus. He reached into his jacket, pulling out his gun, the one he carried for protection every day on the job. The very tool that had once symbolized his sense of duty, his sense of justice, now felt like an extension of the darkness inside him. His hands were shaking as he pointed it at Devonte, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Devonte's eyes went wide in shock. Marcus, no. Don't do this. You're not like this, he pleaded, but it was too late. In a moment of blinded rage, Marcus pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot shattered the silence of the night. The gunshot echoed in the quiet night, reverberating through the walls of Devonte's home. Marcus stood frozen, his hands still trembling around the gun's grip, staring at his brother's motionless body. The room was eerily silent, save for the sharp, ragged breaths Marcus took, each one feeling more labored than the last. Time seemed to slow as the reality of what he had just done began to sink in, and with it, an overwhelming wave of regret, fear, and disbelief. Devonte's body lay slumped against the wall, blood pooling around him, but his eyes were open, wide with shock, frozen in the expression of a man who had never believed he would meet this end at his brother's hands. For a moment, Marcus didn't know whether to scream, to run, or to collapse in tears. The rage that had propelled him to pull the trigger was already starting to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of horror at the irreversible nature of his actions. The gun dropped from his hand, clattering onto the floor, but Marcus remained rooted in place. His mind was numb, the chaotic thoughts of his betrayal, his ruined life, and the enormity of what he had just done swirling in a vortex of confusion. He had wanted answers, and he had wanted justice, he had wanted Devonte to feel the weight of his actions, but now he was left with nothing but the terrible consequences of his own impulsive choices. Suddenly, the reality of his actions began to sink in more sharply. He had killed his brother. In the heat of the moment, Marcus had lost control. There was no going back. His hands began to shake uncontrollably, and for the first time, he felt a cold wave of panic wash over him. He had always been the one to keep order, to enforce justice, but now, in a single, irreversible moment, he had become the criminal. It didn't take long for Marcus to realize what needed to happen next. He couldn't just walk away from this. He couldn't undo the damage he had caused. And, for the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly powerless. His first instinct was to call for help, to turn himself in, but then another thought crossed his mind. what would happen to his children? What would happen to them if their father was arrested for murder? The idea of his children growing up without him, without both parents, was unbearable. It felt like the final cruelty in a series of betrayals. They had already been deprived of the truth of their parentage, their entire identity tied to a lie, and now they would be without their father as well. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car approaching the house. Panic seized him as he realized that someone was coming. He couldn't let them find him here, not like this. He needed to leave. But the decision wasn't easy. The pain, the regret, and the self-loathing were suffocating him. With a shaking hand, he grabbed his phone and sent one last, brief text to Ayana, "I'm sorry. I can't stay." He looked once more at his brother's body, his heart heavy with guilt and sorrow. The once unbreakable bond between them had been shattered beyond repair, and now there was nothing left but the aftermath of his violence. With one final look, Marcus turned and fled the scene. The following hours were a blur. Marcus didn't know where to go or what to do. His thoughts were a jumbled mess, and all he could feel was a growing sense of dread. He drove aimlessly, winding through streets, not caring where he was headed, just trying to escape the suffocating weight of what had happened. Eventually, he found himself in a quiet park, the kind of place where people went to reflect or unwind. It was a sharp contrast to the chaos inside his mind. He parked the car, staring blankly out the window at the empty swings, the abandoned playground. His mind kept going back to his children, his beautiful, innocent children. How could he face them again after what he had done? How could he ever look them in the eye, knowing that they were the product of lies and deceit? He had been their protector, their father figure, and now he had shattered their world. The sirens were inevitable. They would come for him. The police would be searching for him, and when they found him, he would be arrested. He knew he could not run forever. The weight of his crime would catch up with him eventually. In the hours that followed, Marcus was flooded with memories of his life before the betrayal. His career as a police officer, the respect he had earned from his colleagues, the admiration he had once felt from his community, it all seemed so distant now. His identity had been built on principles of justice, duty, and family, but those things were now meaningless. He had thrown it all away in one moment of rage, and nothing would ever be the same again. The news of Devonte's death broke quickly. The details of the shooting, Marcus Ford, a respected police officer, allegedly responsible for the murder of his own brother, became headline news. The media was relentless, painting Marcus as a man driven to madness by the betrayals in his life. They spoke of the affair between Ayana and Devonte, the deception that had torn the Ford family apart. They speculated about Marcus's state of mind, his motivations, and the reasons behind his shocking actions. But for those who knew Marcus, the tragedy was almost too much to comprehend. How could a man who had served with honor, who had dedicated his life to protecting others, end up in a situation like this? Ayana, meanwhile, was left to deal with the fallout. Her guilt was as heavy as the grief she felt over losing both her husband and her lover. She had lied to Marcus for so long, and now, as the truth came to light, the consequences of those lies were irrevocable. She was left alone, burdened with the reality that her actions had led to the destruction of everything she had once known. Her children were now without their father, and they would grow up knowing the story of how their lives had been turned upside down by the affair, the lies, and the tragic violence that had followed. Days passed, and the legal process began. Marcus was arrested shortly after the shooting, his actions immediately under investigation. His lawyer advised him to remain silent, but even as he was read his rights, Marcus's mind remained numb. He felt as though he were watching someone else's life unfold before him, as though he were trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The trial would eventually come. Marcus would face charges of second-degree murder, and his life as he knew it would be over. His past, his career, his family, none of it mattered anymore. The man who had once been a respected police officer was now a man facing the consequences of his own violent choices. In the end, there were no winners. Ayana was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, but even she knew that nothing could ever be the same. The children, too young to fully understand, would eventually learn the truth, about their mother's affair, about their real father, and about the tragedy that had torn their family apart.